Well, welcome to the Creo Collective webinar, where we're going to talk about city, church, city collaboration, working together for the good of the kingdom of God across the city. I got Casey Crimmins with me. Casey, we go back, man. When's the first time we met?
18 or 19?
18? Not 18 years ago,
Yeah, 18
2018.
years. Yeah, 18 years ago. You and I were in elementary school.
It's good. It's always good to talk to you and connect with you, and
Yeah, man.
just love the work that you're doing in Charlotte. And why don't we just kind of kick off by, I'll ask you the question of what's it mean to be a city church or a citywide movement? I'm sort of tired of even using the word church because it leads toward people arguing about what a church is. And then all of your neighbors are just completely disinterested in talking to you because you're talking about church. But I think the word movement, being a movement across a city, or teaming up as the people of God to see the kingdom in a city, what comes to mind when I ask, what does it mean to be a city church or a city movement for the people of God in a city? It's the first thing that comes to mind for you.
Man, a lot of C words like connected, collaborating, celebrating, what God is doing outside of just your church and understanding what he's doing in the church. I think as you expressed it, like the church of a city, and I just finished an email where I referenced the church of the city and capitalized the C, and just wondering how that's going to strike the folks that I sent the email to, because that's something that Paul wrote to more than anyone else, and referenced more than anyone else when he was talking or giving instruction. So for me, yeah, it's the movement of Jesus, the collective body, the ecclesia, all the fun words, moving in a city, and how that practically plays itself out is those individual expressions of the church are in some way connected. Not every church has to be connected with every other church, although that would be all sorts of fun and gets my 7 brain like excited, but in some way connected to the broader vision of the church in the city, and then celebrating what she's doing, and collaborating along the way. So I'd say those are the 3 things that come to mind.
Yeah. You have to sort of lay down the idea of your own little kingdom and just go, who cares, man? It's about the kingdom of God, and we just want to see people transform, places transform. So as you're talking about this, maybe you could describe some of the various initiatives, efforts, collaborative work being done across Charlotte.
Yeah. This is going to be fun, because sometimes it's like, there's first order, second order, and third order effects, and we describe second and third order effects as like network effects, because at the end of the day, For Charlotte's not a church. It is a backbone infrastructure, connectional agency. So we don't do a whole ton, but we try to create infrastructure for the movement of Jesus to take place, to be experienced, and to be seen. So
I just love that you use the word connectional. That's good.
Okay.
Keep going.
Yeah. So with that comes, like, because a lot of people ask, like, well, what do you do? Like, how are you impacting the city? And it's like, well, our mission is to connect pastors for personal church and city renewal, knowing that kind of the order of change and the theory of change kind of starts with, if we have healthy shepherds, hopefully that's leading them to lead healthy local expressions of the church. And if the local expressions of the church, like all over, are healthy, then wouldn't that somehow correlate to the health and flourishing of a city? So for us, we are pretty dialed in terms of focus to our leading pastors. We connect them through networks, and that can be geography based, where pastors are getting in a room. Like I know Mike is part of our Northeast one. Pastors get in a room once a month, and we try to create an atmosphere and a culture that allows them just to be the people that they are. And we don't care what you ran on Sunday morning. We don't care where your budget is. We care how that's impacting you as a pastor. and a leader, and it creates a circle of folks that have a shared experience and can empathize and encourage one another as they go through those experiences. Because as we know, being a leading pastor the last several years, decades, centuries, who knows, has not been easy. The load that's being carried and all that is not fun. So anyway, how do we do that? We get folks in a room and we understand that there's kind of a progression to unity, because we'd love for us to come out the gate and just be like, hey, we're all going to do this. And every senior pastor says, yeah, my church is totally going to do that. But we know it's just not the world we live in. In Charlotte specifically, we have about 1,000 local expressions of the church, and who knows how many denominations and thousands of nonprofits. I mean, it's literally the city of churches and the city of like, let's get stuff done, but just everybody's kind of buckshotting everywhere. So we know that at the base level of unity is relationship. So everybody always wants to skip to like, let's do something. And it's like, yes, but if we don't begin with relationship, what are we doing? It's just activity. And so I often am found saying that the movement of the kingdom, or the kingdom, it seems to expand at about the movement of trusting relationship. So when pastors are in rooms and they're getting together on a regular basis, start to, hey, I know your name, I know your church, maybe I know your wife's name, maybe I know a bit of your context. And you start doing that on a regular basis, all of a sudden communication starts to flow, trust is starting to build, and pastors look around and go, hey, why don't we do something together? Like what are y'all doing for, Thanksgiving? Hey, what outreach are you doing? Hey, how are we impacting this community? Because it's regional. So in this part of the city, we know that this neighborhood, man, really needs some help. Can we get together on this and see if maybe some funding can flow, some people? And so that's always like second and third order effects. Because if I walk in the room and say, hey, I want you guys to do this, the level of buy-in is going to equate to the level of trust they have in me. And once I leave the room, I don't know what happens. So we have to create infrastructure for those relationships. I mean, it's almost like a dating service for pastors, which don't ever push that back into Charlotte. But
There,
like, hey, do you
there would
guys?
probably be Chick-fil-A. The first date would be at Chick-fil-A.
Thank you. First day would be Chick-fil-A, and then Bojangles. So let's get pastors to like each other, and then it builds to that. So what we've seen come out of that second, third order effects have been, we have a network down to Fort Mill, kind of the south part of Charlotte. 10 to 15 pastors get together every month. Great leadership, great vision from the pastors that are the network leaders of that network. And over the past 3 to 5 years, they've said, hey, why don't we publicly display our unity through a joint gathering? They cancel their Sunday morning service, or this was the vision years ago. Let's cancel Sunday morning. Let's get together. We're going to worship on Labor Day weekend. So Sunday afternoon in a park. And the first year there's like 2 or 3 churches, and then gets brought to the group, and they're like, oh, maybe, yeah, we'll do it. So there's 5 or 6 churches, 7 churches. Well, this past September, whatever, there was 11 churches. 11 churches canceled Sunday morning and said, let's worship together. And let's not just stop with worship. Let's move to mission. And then connected it to, I think for that one, it was like a food drive, serving food, something with food. They've done stuff with schools in the past. So connecting relationship to worship to mission in a part, ownership, collaboration, like that was amazing. I took my family to it, just short story. I took my family to it because I'd never been. And my 4 kids, who are 12, 10, 8, and 6, always ask me what I do for a living, because all they know I do is meet with pastors. And they're like, what do you do? And so to be able to go to an event and be like, okay, do you see these shirts, different churches? Do you see this? 98% of the people, of the 3,000 people that were there, 98% of them have no idea who I am, who For Charlotte is, or what we do. But what they're experiencing is the unity of the bride of Christ, tying that to mission for a geography. That's what Daddy does for a living. Tries to create infrastructure for this. So I could go.
No, I love that, man. And I think you said something to the effect of collaboration happens at the speed of relationship. We say that, in terms of discipleship. I think it's true, man. Like, you want to work together, you want to see somebody grow. It's all about relationship. Last week, a few of us, micro church network kind of people were together hanging out, and Brian Sanders made an observation, which I thought was great. The observation was the present is creating, the future is collaborating.
Mhm.
And so there are a lot of people right now saying, let's create, let's form things, let's start things. Creo collective means create together. And so you got the create piece, we're forming new things, but we got to work together. So
Mm.
when you look across like Charlotte and you see some of the bigger needs, you've developed some relationships and people are coming together. You mentioned food, but as you think in serving and helping in schools and that sort of thing, but as you think about some large scale issues like across the city, you
Mhm.
look at like homelessness or drug addiction or whatever, right? Talk about how a citywide effort of the bride of Christ collectively working together in unity is necessary for the sake of a place like Charlotte, rather than just a bunch of individuals, churches, or organizations trying to knock stuff off themselves.
Man, Mike, it's like you took a beach ball and I have like a bat. Because this, when I tell people the three types of networks that we have prayer networks, we have pastoral networks, and we have affinity networks. And I'd say we're fueled by our prayer networks. Like that's where the energy is coming from. It's where the spirit, like things are being stirred up in the spiritual sense. Our pastoral networks are kind of our engine, like our here and now and like bread and butter. Like we got to do this right. But if you want to talk about what the most exciting things are, it's all of our affinity networks that are like literally at a clip that I cannot keep up with.
So
Beginning,
you said prayer, pastoral, and affinity.
mhm. And
Yeah, you
affinity is
couldn't think of
us.
another P. Prayer,
I know.
pastoral. You need another.
Well, the funny thing is, the the affinity networks are based on either passion or position. So pretty close. So passion meaning something that's waking people up in the middle of the night. Position meaning like next gen pastors, executive pastors, like we're in a position. So our affinity networks based on passion. One of them specifically to talk to like systemic need, because this is where my heart. I feel like over the last several years, I went from networker and bringing folks together, and man, we got to make this thing work. To like, okay, what therefore shall we do? And so we look across the landscape of Charlotte, and one thing specific that breaks my heart is the foster care system. As a former foster parent of a 15-year-old boy who ended up turning 16 in our house, and tumultuous situation, we got thrust into it. It was a kinship placement. I've always had a heart for that, but luckily I have always been connected to an incredible nonprofit in our city called Congregations for Kids. So Congregations for Kids has tried to be the bridge between kind of the system and the church, but it's just been a really tough struggle because it's kind of a bear. You walk in a room and say, hey, foster care. And people are like, oh man, like we can't foster kids. What are we going to do with those? You know, we have no room. It's like, no, wait, there's 50 other things you could do to help support and to be a part of like the bridge. So we have reshaped and I believe are creating a blueprint for what it's going to mean for the church to step into systemic level situations in our city. And this is how it's kind of coming together. So we are pulling together rooms where we begin with data, and we bring the pastors in the room, we bring the nonprofits in the room, we bring some of the city leaders and officials in a room. It's not 400 people, it's about 50 to 60 people. So there's a level of accountability and a level of buy-in in that moment as you look around the room to say, oh, we don't need every individual expression of the church, but we need the ones that feel called to and a passion for this specific thing. So we bring all those people in the room, say, here's the data. Like, just like, we're not trying to make anybody feel bad about it, but just this is what's going on. And then we say, okay, we come back together several months later and say, okay, now we have 45 folks in the room. We're really dialed in. This is what we want to get done. And this concept of mapping the system, because now we have the city/county folks, we have the nonprofits, and we have the church. And just behind that, I think we have some of the business leaders, but that's a different story. And we say, let's map this system from the time that a child has to be put into the foster care system, whatever reason that is, to the time that they either age out, get adopted, or reunited. Let's see every stop along the way, and then every nonprofit that's doing something, how the city or the county set up to help or not, and then where are the gaps? Where are the gaps? Is it financial? Is it human capital? Like, what is it? Let's map this thing out over the next 6 months. And the next time we sit in a room, so this will be May, the next time you sit in the room, we will have that mapped. And the only way you can map that is if you have some type of backbone infrastructure agency that's only job is to try to be a part of that, like, total ecosystem, bringing to bear like data, information, as well as connections and relationships to the people that should be in the room. So now we come back together. This hasn't happened yet, so we'll see what happens, 6-8 months from now. This is in May. We come back together in May and we basically say, okay, church A, B, C, D, all the way down to the 40, 50 churches that say that they want to be engaged. Here are the actual needs to see this system not eradicated, because you always need a foster care system, but you need it not bearing the weight that it's currently bearing, because there's too many kids that are in need and there's too much stuff out there in need. So here's what's actually needed, and here's how your church can get involved. So you pick, like, you're in the room, you pick, what can you do as a part of this thing? And then over the next 3 to 5 years, can we chip away at the overwhelming amount of need across the entire system and actually see change in that realm happen through the efforts of the church? So that's one.
Yeah.
That's one example.
I love it, man. So, just I'm thinking structurally. So you got prayer, pastoral, affinity. Do you have sort of somebody overseeing each of those areas? Do they each get together in different settings? How do you guys organize? How often do you get together? Do people go to all three of those?
Mhm.
What's it look like through the
Yeah.
course of a year?
Yeah. This has been the big kind of explosion over the past 6-7 months, is that we went from 21, 22 network leaders to 35. And that doesn't seem like a ton of people, but that's a ton of people. And those are all volunteers. Those are pastors. Those are leaders. Those are ministry leaders, all slated into areas either geographically or by passion or position, that are helping to bring together these pastors on a regular basis. So our network leaders in the prayer realm get together every other month. There's 4 of those that cover the 4 quadrants of our city. We have network leaders for each of those. They get together every other month on the second Saturday. Our pastoral networks get together
Now
once.
do they get together in all 4 locations? Groups of people in each location every other month? Boom,
Yeah.
boom, boom.
Yep.
Yep.
Those leaders get together once a month, though, to continue to, build relationship and communicate kind of what the Lord's saying and doing in different areas, build encouragement. We're growing that team. So there's accountability and responsibility geographically. Then the pastoral networks, we have anywhere between 2 to 4, 2 to 3 is kind of a sweet number of networks leaders per network. They gather every month, other than maybe December. Then our affinity networks, we are moving more towards a quarterly.
Now, let me ask you a question there. The groups of pastors, the pastoral piece, when they get together, what do they do? What is that, like a training? Is there like a pathway that they go through? Is it like a big church service? What are they doing there? Encouragement? What's it look like?
When the geographical networks gather, like once a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. The autonomy that they have is pretty strong. Like I coach and onboard each pastoral network leader myself. Just because, again, it's the engine, it's the bread and butter, getting the culture right, getting that. I attend them when they're launching for the first several, just to okay, here's some things we can work on, just think it through. But the general flow is you walk in the room, it's usually about an hour and a half. I tell them 90 minutes is kind of like right where it needs to be. You walk in the room, you do a quick check-in that goes around the room, and there could be six folks, or there could be 15 to 20 folks. It just depends on the week and the month and the network. Quick check-in, usually like a question, like a pointed question, either that's relevant to the season, relevant to the moments, relevant to current, things that are going on in the Charlotte area. Hey, how are you responding to this? Hey, how have you handled this? Or it could be soul care stuff. Like, hey man, how are you finding rest, like, in the Lord this month? And we kind of, not every month is exactly the same. And then you end in prayer. And if there's a meal that you're gathering around, then you eat while you do it. If you're grabbing coffee, sitting in the back of a shop, then you do that there. But it's truly checking in, getting a gauge or a pulse check on a specific question, and then prayer. And 90 minutes goes by and you're like, how did this happen so fast? And usually guys end up hanging out afterward.
Mhm. Yep. No,
It's
that's
very
great.
simple. Like
So,
we have to push against the pastors that walk in the room. They're like, let's get something done. And we're like,
mhm,
whoa, just, we hear you. We hear you, pastor. We want to get stuff done in the city too. Like, let's just start with, like, how are you doing? How's your marriage?
mhm.
Uh, so
So do you find, because you mentioned the relationship piece, that both the prayer and the pastoral gatherings, geographic locations, right,
mhm.
that leads to, let's team up together, let's do something, passion, affinity, let's create something, do something, tackle something, but it comes out of connecting, hanging out, feeling like other people.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and that's like the dueling world that I live in, is to try to understand that each network is always in a different season, right? There are some networks that just got off the ground in 2022, and I am really pushing them to not move to activity too quickly. Like, I hear that there's need. I hear that, hey, if there's a one-off thing, awesome, but please, like, don't bring into that meeting, sign up for this, your church has to show up. Like, we're not there yet. Whereas there's other networks that have been gathering for a long time, have great relationship, and I have to come in and kind of like, hey, so what's going on? Like, where are you finding some common ground? And so coaching through the seasons is important, because not every network's at the same place at the same time.
Hmm. No, that's really good, man. Um, so they each, the affinity kind of one, how often do they gather?
Those are quarterly, and we're again, it's happening so fast. Um, and I'm becoming a bit of a bottleneck, but like, we just launched the Disability Awareness Network, which, if you were to walk into a city and say, what network needs to start? I don't know that many of us, unless we are in that world or affected by it, which, by the way, 1 in 7 families is. I don't know that that'd be a thing. But we had a group, a nonprofit called Johnny and Friends, and a group of pastors that came to us and just said, hey, would Forest Charlotte be interested in like housing this as a network? Because we kind of are gathering 5 or 6 churches. What do you think about that? And we were like, yeah, I mean, if it's allowing pastors to connect, learn, and take action in something that they want to do, then let's figure that out. And so we meet in May, we build the plane, we have our launch in October, and like 40 some odd people showed up, 20 some odd churches, which for a launch of a network in the affinity space is massive in our city. And especially something that feels so tertiary. So something like that's like, couldn't have planned that. That wasn't me pushing, that was just kind of bubbled up. And I feel like a lot of that's happening right now.
Yeah. So you team up together, around an effort,
Mhm.
like we got to do something about this. Um, do you, you guys are a 501 or not? You are?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Now, do you also start other 501s as well? Like, are there new nonprofits that are forming out of For Charlotte and partnership with For Charlotte around different missions and causes? How does the organization of that all work out? What's that look like?
Yeah. I wish I had a whiteboard. I actually do, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to resist the temptation, because part of that, like, uh, stages of unity has a lot to do with when do you go from relational to what we would call operational then moves to structural. So at each stage it kind of requires certain types of leadership, certain types of gifting, certain types of people, certain types of alignment, because at a relational level you just need to be buddies. Like, we love Jesus, you love Jesus, let's hang out and have a cup of coffee. Operational level is like, let's do something together, let's get together on a soup kitchen, let's serve together, let's go build something together. There might be some money involved, human capital, whatever. Structural unity is when something actually is created to sustain what the operational unity was producing. So what you're talking about, like, we have to create a new organization to help sustain, because it's grown so much, it's scaled out, it's actually like growing some legs here. And at that stage, you're probably talking money, way deeper alignment, theological as well as philosophical. All those things are starting to take place here. And that, in my guesswork, is probably where some of these affinities are going to find themselves at some point in the future. So a lot of them are spinning hard right now. They're building some energy. Some haven't even started yet, but there's some energy building. I would see in the next 3 to 6 years, some of them, not every one, because you don't need a 501c3 for everything that's going on. But CFK, Congregations for Kids, was birthed out of Fort Charlotte years ago. And it was almost like before it became what it is now. It was birthed out of and housed under Fort Charlotte for a while because it was the connection between an affinity and the church. As we start to do more, and there's, I don't know, more infrastructure needed, more ways to get involved, we could see that happening. However, and I'll just land on this, I am seeing right now that partnering with a organization that's already doing the work, and maybe like either a best in class or neutral party or someone that we can trust, like a Johnny and Friends. I don't know how many are familiar with that. Like we connect with them and we're like, hey, this doesn't necessarily need to become another 501c3, because whatever work's being done, Johnny and Friends actually has the infrastructure to build out from there. We're looking at doing the something for marriage, the Charlotte something marriage movement, and we're like, oh, what would a network, an affinity network about like affecting the divorce rate in a city look like for the church? Because seemingly the church kind of should own the market on how marriage should be. Now that I don't know where you stand on that stuff, but anyway, like what would that look like? And they are already a 501c3. So what is co-convening versus Fort Charlotte being the only entity involved? And potentially that gives us future looking structural unity even as we're building to it.
No, that's great. So how do you fund it? Is there an expectation of the people that are partnered with Fort Charlotte to give toward the larger 501? Do you raise it from individuals, businesses, people, churches? How's it work?
Yeah. So it started with 3 churches that said this needs to exist. And they kind of got the founder out and running and said, we're going to take care of the next 3 years because we really believe that something like this needs to exist. So greatest gift of God for those organizations or those churches. And then, 7-8 years into existence, they start to go, hey, maybe we shouldn't be carrying the whole bag, because you're serving at this point. I think the most recent count, we have 380 churches, local expressions of the church engaged in Fort Charlotte in some way, shape, or form across the city. We have about 27 funding churches of those 380. So do the math. And then we have a lot of individuals that, several handfuls of individuals that have the means, have the vision, and have the relationship with Fort Charlotte to say, we want this to continue to exist. So here's a bunch of money. So we're trying to find sustainable ways. We've vacillated between, hey, should there be like a membership fee or some type of levels? And we actually have a retreat next month to talk about this very thing. Because you go to any city movement leader across the country, and I'm starting to get to know a lot of them, just incredible men and women leading ridiculous efforts across the country. And the number one thing, every single bar none, is sustainability. Because you can get somebody to get excited about it maybe for a year, 2 years, 3 years, but to really go, how do we build and sustain what we're building as we go? Because I mean, for Charlotte, we added 3 new staff this summer. And as you heard me say several times, like I'm being outpaced by the activity that what wants to happen. So I got to multiply myself at some point. And then you have Rob, and then you have database, and then you have communications and operations. And, so all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's like a legit nonprofit that needs money to fuel itself. We better be really good at articulating our value proposition for the city. And so when we're at our best, we do it great. And when we're not, people are like, so what do you do again? So.
No, that's great. So you said it started with like 3 churches that said the city needs this, right?
Yep.
So people hear about something like Fort Charlotte or, what Surge is doing in Phoenix or whatever. And they go, you know what, we want to do something like that, but man, that just seems like a lot. But if you have a few, I think of even in a rural context, Dave Ferris is on this call. He's got, I think, 10 people meeting up in his local region once a month, right? How would you start? We got people from Philly on here. We got Dakota, North Dakota, South Dakota, North Dakota. Is it North Dakota? South Dakota. Okay. So we got Dakota, we got Philly,
Yeah.
we got like rural Virginia, so various people represented, lots of people tuning in, New England, whatever. Somebody goes, we want to start something. We'd like to start an effort in our area. How would you suggest they start?
They set up a Zoom call with Rob or I, and we walk them through it. It truly, LA. There is something in LA. There's something in New England that I know about. A lot of times I tell folks, and I had this conversation with Brian Sanders a couple months ago, because they're looking at something in Tampa. And my question always is like, what is the Lord already doing? Right? Like we are so quick. We are so quick in our zealousness to start something new or be a part of a movement, to just go out and start putting flags up or drumming up business or whatever. And a lot of times mapping the ecosystem, which is the hardest work, is usually the thing that's going to set you up for the most success as you go forward. Like, who's already meeting? Who's already getting together? What relationships already exist in the geographies that you're sitting in or looking to start something in? Rural might actually be easier than city, because mapping a rural ecosystem might be a little easier. I don't know. I don't live in the rural area, but I'm assuming to figure out like, okay, what churches are in this geography? What denominations, what leadership, who's sitting at the denominational level that might be able to make connections either from cities that already participate or relationships that already exist. Like taking the time to map the system, have the coffee, have the lunch, have the unintimidating question of like, hey, would you want to collaborate? Would you want to know the pastors in this region? Would you want, like, what wants to happen? And that's Rob Kelly, the founder for Charlotte, is famous for saying this so often. Just like we exist to try to like create infrastructure for what wants to happen. I can't make a pastor do something. I can nudge and I can drop tools and initiatives and thought leaders and content into the system. But at the end of the day, if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. So I would say if God was to pick me up from Charlotte and drop me into a city and say, I want you to do something similar to what you did for Charlotte, I'd start the same way that Rob did. It might end up looking very different, but I'd start the same way, which just said, let me meet with any and every pastor that's willing to give me time and just ask the same questions about their heart for this area. Do they even have a frame for geography based like the church? And if not, maybe I can help them with that. Or if they do, when they don't have time or they don't have energy, like, man, I'd love to help. How do I help what wants to happen? So.
No, I think that's a good word, Casey, because it would be my tendency. Be like, let's go change the city, and without going, what's happening in the city? Who's doing what already? How do we meet each other? What does all that look like? That's good.
Yeah.
So what? I can't imagine that everything always goes smoothly and everybody works toward unity. What are some of the biggest hindrances to actually partnering with, creating, seeing something form across the city? What are the biggest challenges to that?
I guarantee you. Oh, let's do this. There's like 10, 15. What do you think it is? Like, type it in the chat. What do you think the biggest barriers to unified city efforts may or may not be in a city? I can only speak to Charlotte, but what do you think they might be?
Yeah, and don't unmute yet because we're recording this. We'll
just
we'll open it up to everyone. Just type it in the chat.
Pastoral gatekeepers. Yep, there's some of those out there for sure. Competition, that's my favorite C. What else? Territorial selfishness. I'm sorry, that was a private message. I won't say who said that, but it's 100% true. I think I saw tribalism, as someone said before. Branding, yes. Okay. So scarcity mindset, 100% Mercedes. Insecurity, yep. So yeah, you guys kind of get the gist. There are just certain pastors, and hear me say this with like all the love in my heart, because I am a pastor and I meet with pastors every single day of the week, and I love them. I can legit tell you I love these men and women of our city. But I can't convince them. Like, that's the work of the Spirit. And it stinks to like cop that out. We can cast vision, we can build relationship, we can even build trust, but at the end of the day, there are certain folks that just will not participate, that will not, for whatever reason. Even the whole like associationism, where we might have a church that's a bit left leaning, that participates in the things that For Charlotte does, shows up to an affinity network meeting, shows up to a pastoral network meeting. And because they're there, someone that's way over here on the right's like, nope, For Charlotte's too liberal for us, and vice versa. We have some folks very far on the right that show up, and they're or they're a contributing church or whatever, and someone on the left, oh nope, you're too conservative for us. So we have a lot of that challenge, even as we kind of hope to maintain this neutrality. And that I could have a whole session just on like what it really takes, what the real cost of neutrality is, and what that word even means at this point. But celebrityism, competition, tribalism, I mean, it's all the things you said. And sometimes I find that I can, and Rob probably has as well, I can't speak to all of his meetings, I have built relationships with pastors very intentionally outside of the For Charlotte ecosystem, not to recruit them, but to understand, like, what is it really? Because we have unbelievable assumption issues in our country, and I am trying to choose not to be held captive to the assumptions made about the other, whoever the other is, and try to build that relationship. And I'm going to tell you right now, over the past 2-3 years, the number of churches, the number of non-white churches engaging in For Charlotte has increased at an almost exponential rate because of some some issues that we had to kind of get over. Because if a predominantly African American or Hispanic or Asian church looks at For Charlotte and says, oh, that's only for white evangelical churches, that's a problem. That's a big perception issue. And we have to own that and then figure out how to rectify it, because we can't be for the city of Charlotte if we're only for some of the city of Charlotte.
So Casey, how would you answer this? Every city, every county needs this because
Jesus said so. He commanded it and prayed for it. I don't know. I'll start with the Bible. I'll start with Jesus, and then from there, I mean, let me tell you the story. Let me tell you what happened. Let me introduce you to somebody whose life was changed because they got their head up a little bit and saw that they weren't.
I mean, clearly the world around is going to be curious by the fact that we like each other when we tend to look like we're in competition traditionally. Yeah. But I also feel like some of the stuff you're describing, we're not gonna touch, like poverty, homelessness, drug addiction, if we don't work together. When you talk about like marriages across the city, stuff like that, like we gotta work together. These are bigger efforts that require a united group of people working together.
100%.
Yeah. Do you think Charlotte notices?
I just sent a video to my network leaders this past week to share like an anecdotal and then a very specific story, because I'm trying to get better at, like, I feel like I'm unbelievably lucky that I get to hear all the stories, and so we try to share them back out. But I would say the landscape of the experience of the Church of Charlotte is shifting. And I can only notice that through stories. New pastor coming into the city, wants to plant a church, starts showing up to our gatherings, and we're like, hey, where'd you come from? Like, what's going on? He's like, oh, I told my friend that I was going to be planted in Charlotte, and their only response was, well, then you have to know for Charlotte. You got to meet these guys. You got to be connected. Older pastor, been in the city a long time, starts to take notice that some of his younger friends are hanging out at For Charlotte stuff. And you start to get that, okay, young man, tell me about this For Charlotte thing. What are y'all trying to do out there? And another pastor reaches out last week, a buddy of mine who was not a pastor that ended up being an interim pastor, leading pastor, and says, hey man, I've been in the role for a little bit. I'm just feeling lonely. Like I'm feeling the isolation. Is there anything y'all can do to help? Like, could you connect me to any pastors? And I shot an email to the two closest networks geographically. Network leaders hit me back within 45 minutes, shoot emails both individually and group to him. And he's already been invited to like 3 network things. And so to be able to be like the safety net for pastors in our city, that if they find out about us, we actually can like do something, is like, that changes the narrative. It changes the narrative of what it means to be a senior pastor in our city. And the more that we get to do that, I think the more the narrative will change.
Yeah, Casey, thanks for joining us, man. This was fantastic. You did an incredible job just helping us picture what you guys are up to there. Love your heart, man.
Yes, I'm definitely familiar with Ray Bakke. He mentored my boss's mentor and did some mentoring of Rob Kelly. David asked that question. Sorry.
Awesome. Yep. Well, if you're tuning in, thanks for checking this out. If you have any more questions, you can reach out to me. I can connect you with Casey if you're interested in talking to him more.